We left off last week on the question that we, on a hint of tikkun olam, of a takana, of an ordination, an ordinance which the Bet Din made in order to sort something out, in order to make the world better. And by the way, tikkun olam in the time of the Mishnah certainly is really restricted to places where the halacha is clearly going wrong. And we need to change the halacha to stop these things going wrong. In other words, it's not, I would say that when people talk about tikkun olam today, they talk about it in a much more expansive way than it's used in the time of the Mishnah. And that's not to say, by the way, that people who use that expression today are wrong. I mean, they've taken an idea from the Mishnah and they've expanded it. But in the time of the Mishnah, we are very much concerned with halacha. And so we learned about lost animals. People who used to find an animal would just run away in case they were liable for its libations. So the court decreed that the libation offerings should come from public funds. And Rabbi Shimon then says, and we're now picking up in the 6th Mishnah of the 7th chapter, Rabbi Shimon says that there were 7 other things, or 7 things, actually not other things. There were 7 things that the court decreed. And that was just one of them. So, of course, Rabbi Shimon is going to now tell us what the other 6 are. Amar Rabbi Shimon, Shiva Dvarim Hikinu Beit Din v'zeh echad mehen. Rabbi Shimon said the Bet Din made 7 ordinances, and that was one. So let's have the other. Let's look through what the other 6 were. Nochri sheshilach olato mi medinat hayam. Some non-Jew sends in a sacrifice from far away, from medinat hayam, from overseas. It's come from way away. Of course, we can't send this back. And perhaps this non-Jew, by the way, this might be someone of political importance. Maybe not, but we can't send the offering back. And we probably don't want to refuse to offer it. Let's just keep that in mind. Veshilach iman nesachim. And they sent its libation offerings with it. What sort of libation offerings? Well, they might have sent the wine and the oil. Or more likely they will have sent the money for the wine and the oil, because shipping over wine and oil that is in a state of tahara, it would be complicated from overseas. Anyway, certainly the Gemara interprets this as sending over money. So the non-Jew sends his offering, and he sends over money for the libation offerings. Brevin Michelot. We offer up what he offered. And the imlav. But if he doesn't send money for the libation offerings, Revin Michel Tzibur, they should be offered from public funds. We're not going to get to a point where we reject this offering because the libation offerings are not there with them. V'chein, ger shemet, v'hnich zvachim. What about a convert who died and left sacrifices? Of course, the convert might not have. If he converted after his children were born, he doesn't have Jewish heirs. So we can't just go over his inheritors for the libation offerings. If he left money for the libation offerings, Karevin Mishelo, we offer up his. Imlav, Karevin Michel Tzibur. If not, we offer them up from the public purse. We're not going to disrespect the offerings of this convert who's no longer alive. Utnai Beit Dinhu, and it was a condition laid down by the Bet Din, Al Kohen Gadol Shemet, that in the case of a dead high priest, this is a high priest who's essentially died. Well, we'll see in a minute. He's essentially died pretty much in the middle of his service, and we haven't got a replacement yet. That his mincha should be offered from public funds. And Rabbi Yehuda is going to disagree. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Michel Yorshin. Rabbi Yehuda says from the property of his heirs. Ushlema hayta kreva. And by the way, it had to be the whole of it. This is regardless of whether it's from public funds or from his heirs. And this is a puzzling one. But in order to understand this Mishnah, we need to learn a verse. We need to learn a verse. And it's in Vayikra, by Deber Hashem el Moshe lemor, Ze korban Aharon uvanav. This is the offering of Aaron and of his sons. So now you can see, by the way, why Rabbi Yehuda wants to get the inheritors, the children of the Kohen Gadol, to pay, right? This is the offering of Aaron and his sons. Asher yakrivu Lashem b'yom himashach oto. This is which you will offer up to the Lord on the day when he's anointed. The high priest would actually offer this on every day. The pasuk talks about on the day that he's anointed. He carries on offering. Asirit ha'efa solet mincha tamid. He carries on offering it because it says tamid. A tenth of an ephah of fine flour for a meal offering, perpetual, always. So it's not just on the day he's appointed. Machatzita b'boker u'machatzita ba'erev. So he'd offer half of it up in the morning and half of it up in the evening. And the commentators explain actually that he would make this into matzot, and he'd offer half of them in the morning and half of them in the evening. And if he died, maybe he dies at lunchtime, and a successor is appointed by the afternoon, well, his successor will clearly offer up the afternoon. But what if he dies at lunchtime and his successor has not yet been appointed? That's the case that we're discussing here. And the Bet Din is saying, look, if he dies at lunchtime, we're not going to let that sacrifice not stand. We will offer it up out of public funds. But we're going to offer up the whole amount. So the Pesukim talk about taking a tenth of an ephah and splitting it into two, half in the morning, half in the afternoon. Well, if the Bet Din is going to come forward with a new tenth of an ephah, then, well, we don't really have the chance to split it in two. So we offer up the whole of the tenth of the ephah. That's the third takana of the Bet Din. And let's carry on, because there are three more. Elimelech, and these are really to help out the Kohanim and to help out the public. Concerning the salt and the wood, that the priests may benefit from them. So people are going to give salt and wood. We've learned that already. People are going to give salt and wood for to the temple. The priests clearly going to eat the meat that's been sacrificed, that's been burnt with that wood, and that's been salted with that salt. Well, clearly the priests are allowed to eat the meat, but are they allowed to benefit from the salt and the wood? Well, the Bet Din makes a takana. Yes, they are. Obviously, they can't use it for their personal purposes, but to the extent that it's been used to salt and to fire the sacrifices, they can benefit from it. Now, the next one's a bit broader. Ve'ala para shelo yihu mo'alim ba'efra. And concerning the heifer, that using its ashes is not considered sacrilege. So the ashes of the red heifer are liberally distributed, because anyone who comes in contact with a dead body can have some of this stuff sprinkled on them. And I mean, the commentators talk about an anxiety that people will, take the ashes and try and use them for healing, because you can imagine the ashes of the heifer are a sort of antidote to death. I mean, who has become tameh from contact with a dead body? It's someone who's had a dead body in their tent. So it's someone whose close relative has died. That's the kind of person that is sprinkled with the ashes of the red heifer. And it seems to be, by the way, some kind of soap. The red heifer was a special breed of cow that seems to have a very high fat content. So the ashes seems to be some kind of soapy substance. By the time you mix the ashes in water, it's some kind of soapy substance, and it's sprinkled on you. You rub your face with it, and then you are eligible. And then you take a bath, and you're eligible to come back in the community. It's a bit like a precursor of our Shiva, that you had to do this for 7 days before you came back in the community. It made you want to take a bath, basically. It made you want to renew yourself before you came to the community. So that anyway, everybody does this. Everyone who comes into contact with death does this. And the Bet Din makes a takana that there's no question about a me'ila, about sacrilegious use of holy objects, if they use these ashes which are sprinkled on them. Ve'al hakinim hapsulot shehu va'ot mishel tzibur, and concerning bird offerings which have become unfit, that they should come from public funds. Now, we learned, by the way, when we were learning about the financial dealings with the temple, we learned actually when the temple buys something, generally the seller is responsible for making sure that the quality is such that the item can be sacrificed. And that's effectively what Rabbi Yossi says. And the halakha, by the way, goes according to Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi, Omer, Hamasapek et hakinim musapek et hapsulot. Someone who supplies the bird offerings is bound to supply those which had become unfit, i.e. to replace those which have become unfit. And the halakha, I believe, I'm almost certain goes according to Rabbi Yossi. But this was that was the last of the takanot. And that is the closure of chapter 7 of Shekalim. And then we go back to our theme of lost and found. Remember how we started this? We started with all kinds of things which are found in Jerusalem. And of course, one of the things that was found were animals wandering around, and we had to deal with possible liability for the libations. And now we're going to go back to this issue of lost and found and things which are found. But we'll see that the Mishnah surprises us. Kol harukin hamninsa'im b'Yerushalayim. Any spit found in Jerusalem, tahorin, is clean. Chutz mishal shuka elyon divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says anything you find, you can assume it's clean, other than that which is up in the upper market. I think Gentiles frequented the upper market, and Gentiles were generally assumed to be in a state of not tahara. So their spit was generally considered not to be clean. But generally, any spit found in Jerusalem is clean, according to Rabbi Meir. And Rabbi Yossi, the halakha goes according to Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi has a different view. Rabbi Yossi Omer, B'shayir Mot HaShana, in ordinary days of the year, regular days of the year, Sheba Emtza Tmeim Uveshe Bat Stadin Torin. If you find the spit in the middle of the road, it's tameh, because most people walking up and down on the middle of the road. So if there's a zav, if there's someone who's got an emission, if there's someone who's ritually impure, then his spit is going to be in the middle of the road. It'll be where most people are found. And Rabbi Yossi then adds, Veshe bat stadin tohorin. Anything by the side is tahor. Rabbi Yossi assumes that because most people walk in the middle of the road, someone who wants to maintain himself in a state of tahara will walk at the edge of the road so as to get out of the crowd. So he's going to assume that spit found at the side of the road is tahor. But, and there's a but, at festival times, it's going to be the other way around. Ufishat haregel, sheba emtsa hatorin. If at festival times, the Jerusalem is flooded with pilgrims, and they've come for the festival, and they've come to maintain themselves in a state of tahara. So it's assumed that effectively they're the majority. So what is in the middle of the road is clean. Veshe, but stadin tama'in, and anything on the edge is unclean. So at that time of year, you assume that someone who's not tahor is going to walk at the side of the road, so as not to make tameh the pilgrims who are here for the festival, who are there for the festival. Shemi pnei shehen tum'im mistalkin l'stadin, because those who are unclean are few in numbers, and they just walk at the side of the road. So Rabbi Yossi is essentially saying, look, and we've seen this theme come through with things which are found that we go according to the majority. And by the way, we assume some kind of social cohesion, some kind of consideration that people have for one another in Jerusalem, particularly at the time of the Foot Festival.